Good afternoon, pop pickers. Good evening, good afternoon, good night, but not goodbye. Thank you for joining me on this Beatles celebration Get Back live stream. As you can see, I'm kitted out for the occasion with shirts and hats and mugs and a whole pile of Beatles stuff here. And it's great to have new Beatles content. What can I say? And we're going to get into a little bit of that and what that looks like and what it means and all that good stuff. But first, I would love to invite on a very special guest who's appearing with me today in this show. It is the fantastic Mr. Tom Connors of Midnight's Edge.
Hello.
Howdy, buddy.
How you doing?
I'm doing great, sir. How are you?
I'm feeding my face, but other than that, I'm doing all right.
Yeah, well, you've come off yet another extensive Midnight's Edge show, so that was good stuff, and thank you for taking the time to join me.
No problem, man.
I know you're a big music man, and obviously with MEAD Radio, a fantastic show.
Right.
And I know you're a big Beatles head, and I think you and I could have some serious discussion here.
I'm sure it'd be fun to talk about some Beatles. Always love talking Beatles.
Absolutely, mate. No, it's a pleasure to see you here. So, let's talk about a little bit about Get Back then. So I'm just gonna see. I'm gonna share some stuff here. Hopefully there'll be nothing.
Week one.
Oh yeah, that was the Ron. Was that the Ron Howard? I think that was a Ron Howard thing.
I think that was Ron Howard who did that.
Yeah. I think I may have heard that Peter Jackson was doing it, but I didn't, certainly that he is going into the radioactive vault down there, the nuclear vault. I didn't think it was going to turn out to be quite such an extensive job on this material. And that's one of the complaints there's been about it, that is that it's very, very long.
Yeah, I remember seeing recently a interview with Jackson where he was talking about it. And, at first it was meant to be like this 2 or 3 hour project, and then it got even bigger and bigger. And he's like, when they told him, since, things were shut down and it was going to go to streaming instead of actually being theatrical and all that business. Well, then he's like, well, then I got freedom here, and he really wanted to get every day in there. Right. Like, so, I think it's great. Honestly, I wish there was more, to be honest.
Well, you got to wonder, because when you think of Lord of the Rings and those 3 movies, and then the extended versions that came out, which are magnificent, just has he kept anything back for perhaps Blu-ray release or box set release?
Potentially, he did say that there was a much longer version than this, even.
Yeah.
So that's a plausibility at some point. I wouldn't be surprised, because we did see the same thing with like the Beatles anthology back in the day.
Well, that's right. I mean, there was bits and pieces that even today people say still haven't been brought out from that. And there's still a few bits and pieces of music in the can. I think there's the Carnival of Lights show soundtrack that the Beatles did for a show at the Roundhouse.
That they don't want out there, yeah.
That they said, we're a health warning on that one. But it's still there in the can, and I'd love to hear that. It's probably a lot of noodling, but I think Peter Jackson said he had to work through something like 150 hours worth of film and audio to get it down to this.
Well, you got to figure they shot for like 5 days a week, probably roughly 8 to 12 hours a day, minus a lunch period. I'm sure there's a ton of footage. I mean, well, really, he said there wasn't so much the footage aspect, which there is a ton, but it was more so audio.
Yeah, I think there was more. There was like 2-3 times the audio
Yes.
of the video, although there's multiple camera angles too. But the audio is legendary in its content. In fact, if you look at and we'll take a look later at the list of songs that they actually jammed or performed during these sessions, it's 700 or 800 songs. It's
craziness.
It's crazy. They did old stuff from the Hamburg days, standards and rock and roll stuff. They did the old Beatles stuff. They did recent White Album stuff. They did other bands' material. And then they did all this stuff, plus the Abbey Road stuff. They even
gave names to some of their goofy mucking around here and there, too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so length is certainly, I mean, if you were a Beatles hater or agnostic, I think you would find it to be a bit of a slog. I think it's what, 78 hours at least, 7 or 8 hours of in the split between 3 episodes.
Perhaps, but I could even make an. I think even somebody who's not even that big of a fan or actively not a fan of the Beatles could possibly even if it's just somebody as a music fan could probably still appreciate what's been done here because we get to
Yeah.
see one of the most influential bands in history write an album for a month, and actually like an album
Mm,
and a half because we see a lot of the what becomes Abbey Road as well. There's some bits and pieces
yeah,
here and there.
that's right.
So
And even some
yeah,
solo material that pops up in their first solo
yep,
album.
yep,
So
yeah.
yeah, you get to see them write it, you get to see them develop the song live, and you get to see them produce the finished version, right from the roughest of rough to the final polished performance. And it's actually when you're for me, you're watching the beginning of it and you're thinking, there's no way they're going to get that song finished. Like
Yeah.
Get Back or Don't Let Me Down or whatever. They're just like they change the intros, they change the verses, the words, and they're like arguing and pissing around. You're never going to get this done. And
Well,
then
the
all of
other
a
thing I
sudden,
had was like the completion anxiety too throughout a lot of it because like just like a great example. Speaking of, is like when George is kind of sitting there plucking around with something. It's
don't say that
attracts me
word.
like no other lover. Come
That's
on, how
right.
hard is
Yeah.
that? It's like, come on, just say it. Just
And it's just Jojo. You don't need any more than that. Don't say that. There's no surname. Just Jojo.
yeah,
And you're urging them on, yeah. But it is, as I think you're right. If you were a music lover, a musician, a music historian, anyone that was at all interested in the process of music, particularly modern rock music, there's definitely something in there for you. I think if you're just a casual pop fan, you would be like, oh God Almighty, what is this? Although I would always say to the casual fan, if you don't want to watch the whole thing, just watch the last one and watch the rooftop performance.
to a
Because then,
point. Yeah,
yeah,
go
you
ahead.
see a rock and roll band there. The Beatles were a rock and roll band, and that's the last chance you get to see them as a rock and roll band.
As an historical aspect there, yeah, but I mean, I would argue the rest. Like, this is something that could be shown in like music schools and stuff for the very simple fact of, I mean, look at how the song "Get Back" is kind of what a lot of this, even though the album was called "Let It Be," "Get
Yeah.
Back" is still kind of the whole song, the idea, everything that kind of
Mm.
wraps up this, and that's why clearly Peter Jackson chose that instead of, and it was the original working title for the album for a while.
That's right. And in fact, if I reach over here, if things fall off this desk, then you'll have to carry on your own.
But my point, what I was going to get to though, is just
The
the
original
simplicity of that
book
song. Yeah, the
was
simplicity
Get
of that
Back.
song, and yeah, and how we watch in real time
Yeah.
Paul McCartney write the song on the stage because that
Mm.
was not even one of the ones he clearly had prepared because he come in with a couple that he had been
Mm.
prepared for. George had a couple. John had like one or two, and he was clearly the most unprepared one in the group. And just watching Paul in just a matter of minutes, like literally 3 to 5 minutes, they show there him just kind of the beginnings of that song, and it's just like wow. And it almost, I hate to say, but it almost demystifies the gods in a weird way.
Mm.
But just to see that process happening, I mean, I feel like if more people who are musicians and stuff saw that, be like, yeah, this is how you do it too. We get it. They're not doing anything different here than what you're doing. You just got to find that that special spark that makes you you, and
Yeah.
and the Beatles had that already at this point. But like, just that beauty of like, it really reminds me of the interview with Bob Dylan where he was basically saying, like, for the last 50, 60 years, people have been trying to read into my lyrics. He's like, I don't even fucking know what the hell they mean. They just sound good together. And,
I'm
and
just
that's
a
kind of
song and dance man.
exactly like, and that really kind of feeds into this whole like demystifying the gods thing, right? Like yeah, you can sit there all day and pretend like, yeah, and revolution number 9, it was this, and it was meant to say this, and it was a comment on the destruction of modern society, and it's like, no, they're just fucking around with tapes.
That's
Like
right.
literally,
Yeah.
let's be real here, kids. And it just happened to
Yeah.
sound cool and neat. You can read into it all you want,
That's
but
right.
you
They've
know,
said that. The Beatles said that many times. John and Paul, and George. It was just it was what it was. I mean, Helter Skelter's a song about a fairground ride. It's not not a call
Well,
to
you
go out
figure
and
sooner or
kill
later they
people.
had to have that conversation. Like, I don't know if I can rhyme another word with love anymore.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I
But
can't
yeah,
figure
the
it out.
it's interesting that you mentioned that coming in with songs prepared. That was one of the things I noticed about this is that they had a bunch of stuff, but it was just very rudimentary. And if you think back
In the
to
demo stage, yeah.
yeah, so the White Album had only been released like in November '68, and this is January '69, and the White Album was just like a disgorging of a ton of material.
It was, yeah, it was kind of like the I hate, well, Christ, this is already 30 years or 20 years old. I was going to say it was kind of like the Use Your Illusion of its time almost. But like that's
Mm.
of its time already. So
In a sense, yeah, yeah.
I don't know
It's
if
like
you'd have a modern equivalent. I guess the closest would be like when Weezer dropped a bunch of those albums like
mm.
simultaneously or whatever. But even now, I feel I can't even really think of a of
Yeah,
something
no,
that's similar to that. Yeah, it was really just kind of an unheard of situation. I mean, because now, really, I mean, if you think about it, a lot of the albums that most of the bands have done for the past 20, 30 years have just as much content as the White Album, and the people talk about, oh, it's how this bloated, that bloated, da 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 da. But you got to stop and think about it. Like they were just doing that because they had all these ideas and
mm,
the juices were
yeah.
flowing. And whether I've heard a lot of people diss on the White Album, but that's one of my actually closer to my favorites of the albums
I
because they're just
remember.
allowed to be themselves. Really,
Well, exactly. They did, and in fact, they were more themselves than they had ever been before, which is part of that process towards the breaking up. But
yeah.
it still doesn't mean it was bad. I mean,
No,
Paul said a few years ago. He says, "Well, I get all these complaints about the White Album being this and that." I said, "Shut up! It's the fucking Beatles' White Album."
right?
You
Who?
know.
Yeah, it's the bloody Beatles White Album.
What the
Exactly.
fuck are you complaining? You know, I can't
Exactly.
quite do the
Yeah.
Liverpool.
Yeah, I know the interview you're talking about too, and I think it's even in the Beatles anthology where he says that too, or similarly. And yeah, it's like it's one of those things that you'll never be able to top, right? I
Yeah.
mean, even Metallica tried to do it with the Black Album, and
Uh,
that's kind of like but that's the thing is like normally like if they were a band that had in the age of CD, they'd have been able to put out as much shit that's on the White Album every album.
mm.
It just so
Oh,
happened that they're like, we're going to do a double album this time, which was
yeah.
just not normal at that point.
And if you think about it, though, I mean, when you look back to their earlier career, I say earlier, it was like 2, 3 years before. They did 2 albums a year and 4 singles that weren't on albums, and they did a world tour every year.
Yeah, that's the other nutty thing is to think about how, I mean, we've kind of gotten back to that in a weird way with the singles, but like it's hard to remember a time, at least for us, age wise, mostly because the album kind of took over in the 70s, right? Like
Mm.
there was a thing when in the time with the Beatles and other bands where they wouldn't, generally throw the singles on the album.
Yeah, they'd keep them
They would,
separate.
yeah, it was a separate thing. And just kind of remembering that now we've kind of gotten back to the single, the day of the singles come back because of MP3s. But, I kind of miss that in a general sense of going to the music shop and having those elaborate
Mm.
singles and stuff like that. Cause that was always a bonus.
Well, you
Um,
look at, for me, my favorite piece of 7-inch vinyl of all time, my favorite single of all time is the double A side Strawberry Fields Forever, Penny
yeah.
Lane.
Oh, and they always
It,
made sure they put out great singles,
not
right?
not on Sergeant Pepper, recorded for it. If you want to, I say, make money or protect music, buy the songs, buy the publishing. So yeah, but just to go back to the White Album, because they'd done all that India stuff in early '68, and while they were there, they were all writing away. So when they got back and they recorded the White Album, they all had dozens of songs, and they just disgorged them all. So I think although there were some leftovers from that stuff that never saw the light of day, like Not Guilty, which ended up in a George Harrison album, and by the time they came to do this, they had kind
Yeah,
of
this is supposed to have All Things Must Pass and Maybe I'm Amazed. I think
yeah.
it was around this time too. Paul
That's right.
wrote it.
They'd kind of dried up a little bit coming into this, which is why they were so rudimentary. Some of the songs, I think, and
But
I
yeah,
think
going back to what I was saying about Get Back is that it kind of became an anthem at the same time, even though they'd already kind of decided that we're getting
mm,
back to the basics, right?
Mm. Well, they released that as a single. I don't know about the US, but it was a single release in the UK in the middle of '69, long before they got round to finally issuing Let It Be in '70.
I'm sure they
They
did, but which was funny because which one was like Get Back was on the album, but it was Don't Let Me Down that got released as a single, but wasn't on
mm,
the album.
that did get put out as a single too, and the version of Get Back that was out as a single wasn't the version that was in recorded in here. It had been
Right.
tidied up somewhat.
Yeah, well,
But
that's the thing is this album suffers from like several different versions. I mean, we could probably get into that eventually, but I know you were finishing a point. Sorry.
no, you go ahead, mate. God, that's right. I love to hear you talk.
Well,
Talk
no,
as
like,
the
well, there's the Phil Spector mix. There's the other mix. I can't remember the
Glenn
gentleman.
Jones,
Glenn Jones, thank you.
Glenn
And
Jones.
then, of
Yeah,
course, we have the Naked mix, which is Paul McCartney's preferred mix.
I like that one.
And we have the two different new remasters, the 2009, and then
Mm,
the Glenn or not Glenn, what's his face, Giles Martin
Giles
remix from
Martin.
Mark Street and
Yeah.
Lee, which I actually I don't mind Naked so much, it's pretty good. But if I had to pick one above any others, it would probably be the Giles Martin mix. I think it captures everything the best. I know that's an unpopular opinion, or at least it's kind of a controversial one, I would say. But I hear things in that version like I've never heard them before.
Mm,
And his recent remixes of all the albums that he's done, I see as probably the best since the original mixes, in my opinion. And
okay, no,
I know that
valid
may
point.
not be a
Yeah.
popular one, but like, I mean, just especially with the multi-channel mixes specifically. But yeah,
Yeah, I think what they've been able to do is to clean these up so much that you can actually hear stuff in them now that might have been buried in the mix before, and particularly things like Paul's bass playing and whatever, just stuff
yeah.
that
There's the
was.
controversial thing between because like I know there was even like differences between the U.S. and the UK mixes of especially the earlier stuff, but like he went with the one kind of echo on the cymbal that was different from the
Mm,
single version, and I know people didn't like that, but I've heard that other version before, so I know which one he was emulating.
mm,
Like so, like again, like it's all down to preferential choice, but I like having all the different versions at the same time. That's the beauty of this, right? Like you get so much of this stuff in that box set that just come out. I don't know if you have that too, that has the Giles Martin mix.
it's on its way.
And it
It's
also
on its
has the
way.
other one we just talked about as
Christmas.
well. Yeah, and it does pretty much put almost everything in there you could think of outside of
Mm,
the initial studio mix from Phil Spector. I think is the only thing that's really not in there. But even though they have
yeah.
some of the single versions in there, so they're kind of there. But
Mm. It's funny, Matt, when you're so used to hearing the Phil Spector ones from like particularly Long and Winding Road and Let
yeah,
It Be,
yeah,
that when you hear Long and Winding Road without all the choirs and the whatever, it's like, oh my God, that song's truly naked, you know? But you got used to it over the decades.
yeah. I mean, I have too, and I got to remember which one's which because even that symbol threw me off and Let It Be, and I had to go back and be
Mm.
like, did they ever do that? That just sounds weird. And I'm like, oh yeah, that was that version from before. But yeah,
Yeah, and there's the three different guitar solos that you can get
yep,
on versions
yep.
of Let It Be. It's just there's one or two of them. Or I prefer one of them to the other two, but I can't remember which one. You can
Yeah,
never
it's kind
remember
of
which one
nice.
it's on. You know.
Yeah, I know, but it's kind of nice that they're finally getting all this stuff out there, and it's not in bootleg form like a lot of us have had for
Mm.
years or been able to access in one way or the other. So, yeah, chopping
On
broccoli.
top of broccoli, and they're all standing there like this.
No, but that's a
Mm.
great analogy. Like that's a hilarious skit, but that's really like what this whole thing kind of felt like was these guys were chopping broccoli. Well,
Broccoli
it's funny
found.
because then you got to question: was he actually doing it to write something at that time, or was he just fucking around? Because as you know, most people know, once they knew they were being recorded most of the time, they just started having one of them just start banging or playing one of their instruments loudly, so they couldn't get picked up when they were talking, more personal stuff.
Mm.
And that was what I was curious if it was one of those times or was him just actually trying to play because they were kind of just playing around more than anything. But then all of a sudden you hear him just kind of get that bass going with the rhythm.
Yeah,
And you're like,
yeah,
that's it right there. And
that's
it's like,
right, right there. There's the rhythm.
yeah.
Stop.
He's just sitting there,
Uh,
dong, 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 dong,
there's
dong.
There's nothing like that. And do you know, I really like George's role in that song, and it's a little bit underappreciated that he ends up as really being the
Yeah.
coordinator and the rhythm guy of that song. He's the guy that sets that rhythm. with the intro, and you see him counting it in. So it's kind of like they've given him that role, and then John's concentrating on playing the little lead guitar bits, and it's slightly different roles for them. And I like that. George counts it in, and he makes sure it stays bang on that rhythm all the way through, which is really neat.
That's a good point, because that also opens up to a broader point of this whole entire endeavor was, it shows, at least it confirms or shows how much full of shit some of these guys were in their, at least their recollections or point of view at the time, because we get to see it, actually happening and hear it and whatnot. And I agree with you. George clearly, he said years and years and years throughout, we've had our little spats because so-and-so said they should have got credit for one line. Well, they didn't ever give me credit for all the other things that I, contributed to the other songs. Like, a lot of those songs should be Lennon, McCartney, Harrison, and in this thing, you kind of see that, like, he did contribute a hell of a lot more than these guys probably gave him credit.
I think so. We didn't get to see a lot of their studio interaction in the earlier years. This is the best we'll see, but they were a tight unit, and I think they all contributed something. And George often took stuff and said, you know what, why don't I play a guitar like this way, or why don't I switch this backwards in Rain? Stuff that you never really got the credit for, I don't think.
Yeah, because he was throwing lyrics out there, he was throwing licks out there, and yeah, and that's the other beauty of, like I said, that opens up to a broader discussion, is that this showed us for many years what a lot of fans had argued about. Was it really the breakdown and the breaking up of the Beatles? No, it really kind of wasn't. Yeah, there was the one little spat that has been overblown for the past 50 years.
I know. Well, they didn't show the spat they didn't show in this was George and John going at it, where they apparently almost had a fist fight.
Well, they talk about it though, and that's
they talk about it,
and they diffused it, which is awesome. Is we finally get to hear like the actual, and we know this is how it works. And being somebody who is on the other side, this is why I try to be, there's stories we've killed and not talked about, or we've tried to, get as many sides to a story as we can. In fact, I was just writing something with a similar kind of thing. But like, that's the thing is, like, they're sitting there talking about, it's like, yeah, we had a disagreement and no punches were thrown, like.
Yeah, that's because they're namby-pamby musicians. They can't throw punches.
And they're like, yeah, they're like hung up on the one time that, like, I think George threw a sandwich or something at John out of jokingly or whatever. And they turned it into this big thing. And like, that's what they're talking about. It's just kind of like how there's the Beatles that are in the press and then, the mind's eye of the world. And then there's just these four guys, right? Like, that are just living their lives. And, and then that's the other side of it too, is where you can really see Paul, he is kind of responsible for two ways, both pushing them apart, but at the same time, still trying to keep them all together.
Yeah. Well, he says it himself, you devolved this role to me.
Yeah.
You guys devolved this role to me. And when I try and do it, you all get fed up. But you gave it to me.
Well, he says in here, like, we're all kind of like wandering aimlessly without Brian, right? As for those who know, obviously, that this is right after the tragic suicide of, self-deletion of Brian.
Yeah, and Brian was one of these guys, although he was barely older than them, he seemed like he was a lot older, and he was one of the guys that could say no. They needed someone to say no sometimes. So once he was gone, you got Magical Mystery Tour, which the music was great. That still didn't suffer.
They didn't have any direction. Yeah.
They had no direction. They didn't know how to write a script or direct a movie, but they went and did it, and it was terrible. Well, places in bits it was okay, but
the music was great. It was kind of the weird thing is we kind of piss on it a little bit, but I think that the Magical Mystery Tour does not get the credit for inventing the modern music video.
Yeah, and I know what they were trying to do. I mean, they were trying to do that free-flowing, what's the Californian guy that had done the acid bus thing? They were
Oh,
trying to
I know
do
what you're
Timothy
talking about, but I can't
Leary.
think
Was
of
it
it.
Timothy
Yeah, I
Leary?
think it was. But like,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, well, you had
Uh,
Hair and you had Head
and
and you had all these kind of movies at that time that were kind of
yeah,
doing
plus
that.
the
Yeah.
British comedians that they loved, like the Goon Show that did all the surrealist stuff as well. So they were trying to do a bit of that, but
Little Monty Python-esque ish.
yeah, and the nobody was saying no to them. Now George Martin, even by the time of this, as you can see in Get Back, is taking a back seat.
Oh, he's
He's
very backseat.
yeah, he's like, I'm an executive producer. Here's Glyn Johns. He'll work with you because I'm not going to put up with this shit. Particularly, he's got other life and his own life to
Yeah.
lead. So they were, but it didn't break them up. They weren't breaking up here. What they were on that decline for various
Well, do you
reasons.
think that George was a little turned off about Phil being involved, or how do you think that was?
I don't. I think in the end he went along with that, and it was really him and John that it was John that wanted Phil
Yeah,
Spector.
I know.
George went along with it. Paul would have nothing to do with it by that time, and that was not particularly because of them. It was because of Alan Klein.
Okay.
When they say that Yoko broke the Beatles up, as you can see from Get Back, that isn't true. I mean, she just sits there, other than the odd wailing.
Yeah, if anything, Linda's more involved than she is.
Yeah, she sits there, minds her own business, and I don't think the others. I think it was better that they had wives and girlfriends and kids and whatever coming in, more of a normal life, especially in at the Apple
It
Studio
wasn't
there.
nearly the disruption that they made it, that we as fans have made it out to be over the years. Yes.
No, it's really Alan Klein that broke the Beatles.
Maybe called something different here, but
by Mark Lewis
book.
and this is the guy that did the anthology research and for anthology and
that, or it's a similar book or something like that. But like, yeah, it's basically a book that breaks down every one.
He's
of the
also
songs
he did this one, the Beatles Chronicle, which is possibly also something you're thinking of, but he breaks down every day and every song and everything in this that they did. But they had sat before, in the old days, they would sit face to face writing songs, and they play some of that old stuff in here. Like One After 909 was an old song.
Oh, right, of course. In the
Revived.
early days when they were touring and shit, they
Yeah.
had a little more opportunity to write together.
But
right?
then
They even bring
when-
that up here.
Once the touring stopped, they wrote their own songs, pretty much. Although they still had a huge influence, John and Paul, on each other, and you could see them working face to face in this, saying, "No, do this, do that, try this, try that," and you hear the working out the vocal arrangements, particularly, and with George. And
I was going to say the one who complains the most was George, I think.
Yeah,
did we get pulled down? I think we got pulled down.
Oh shit! Oh bugger it! I better stop playing this.
Yeah.
Yeah, shit. Sorry, mate. I was thinking without the music, I might get away with it. You know.
Yeah.
How do I restart this? Do I have to end and start again?
Give them a minute. Since you took it down, they might let us go back up. Hang on, let me check. Suspended for policy violation. Shit.
Bugger it.
Can you go into your thing and I don't know if it'll help.
Well, I'm in StreamYard. Let me go into channel.
Wonder how much.
dashboard.
Let's see. It went down about not that long ago, so about a minute. I don't know if you can start another one or not.
If I end this and start again, I wonder what would happen.
The same one? I don't think it will.
No.
I don't think it'll let you start it again.